This podcast is a member of the Place to Be Nation family. Visit us at placetobenation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.
Place to Be Nation Pop, welcome to another edition of the Sellers Points podcast. I, of course, am your host, Russell Sellers, and I know it's been a little while since we've done one of these. I try to keep it to once a month lately until we can find a permanent co-host and all, but, you know, shit happens. And speaking of shit happens, this is another current events episode where we're going to be talking all about some of the crazy stuff that's happened over the course of the month of April. And, of course, there's pretty good bit of stuff to talk about. This episode primarily concentrating on Doomsday Clock and, of course, the big one, Brian Michael Bendis' move over to DC Comics and the release of Action Comics 1000. But I couldn't do this alone. No. I had to go out and reach out to some cohorts to come on and help me out talking about these events. And specifically, for the first time ever on any Place to Be Nation podcast, my friend Joe Johnson has joined us for this very special episode. So, Joe, say hi to the people, and how you doing tonight, man?
Russell, it's great to be on with you, and considering this is my third podcast, I hope you'll be gentle with me.
Oh, you better bite the pillow because we're going in dry. But yeah, you just grit your teeth, bear it, and we'll get through it all. And we'll get through.
Are you implying there's going to be intra-racial anal sex?
Yes.
Interesting.
That could be
a problem.
That could be a thing. I know that's your thing, Nick. And speaking of which, there's Nick Duke on the podcast again. Welcome, sir.
Hi. How's it going?
It's going well, but you didn't come alone because
I never do.
You never do. You usually come like fire, and joining the illustrious Nick Tech on the podcast is his cohort from the other Hard-Traveling Fanboy and also longtime friend of the Sellers Points podcast, Greg Phillips.
Yes, it is such a pleasure to be here alongside you. Not here physically, of course, but here in the collective sense, alongside you and Joe, and of course my partner in the longest running weekly episodic comic book podcast in all Place to Be Nation.
Sorry, I was looking at my phone and not paying attention to anything you were saying as per usual. So I missed
which is usually the case on our own podcast. So.
Yes, that's true.
Well, now we have reached full crossover because my podcast has just been violated.
Mm-hmm.
But hey, what would be a comic book podcast or even a podcast family with comic books if we didn't have massive crossover events that make little sense?
Precisely like this one. That was the whole idea. I'm glad that Greg is on board. He understands what I was going for. You see, it's so good when I don't have to explain it to people. Now, that being said, we're going to just kind of jump right into our subject here, starting in this first half, all about Doomsday Clock. And I since none of us have really talked about it on the shows up to now, I'd kind of like to go around the room and get everybody's first impressions of it so far. We're 4 issues deep out of 12, so not quite to the halfway point, but some big stuff has happened. I know, Nick, I know you are fully up to date on Doomsday Clock, so I want to get your first impressions or your overall impressions so far of the story.
I'm really enjoying it. I mean, that's no surprise, I don't think, to anyone who knows anything about Greg or myself, or even you, Russell, that we're really enjoying a book that Jeff Johns is doing. Shock of shocks there.
Isn't it?
I think the surprise for me has been thus far, typically I am more of a writer guy. Like, I can appreciate good art like everybody else, but, the writers are what bring me to the titles. And this one, as great as Jeff Johns has been from a scripting and from a writing standpoint, this might be the best work I've ever seen Gary Frank do. Like, it is so incredibly detailed. The panel layouts, which I know Jeff Johns probably had a hand in, evoking that sense of reading Watchmen for the first time, back whenever you may have read it for the first time, since none of us were reading Watchmen in 1985, or at least I would hope that we weren't. The ability to recreate the overall feel and tone of Watchmen thus far has just been remarkable. And I'll say, the one thing I've been surprised about from a narrative standpoint to this point anyway is that the story was kind of sold to us as a story that would heavily feature Superman. And outside of one little tag at the end of issue 1, there hadn't been any Superman to be found. So while all the Batman stuff to me has been really interesting thus far, I do find myself kind of like wondering when Superman is going to make his grand entry into the story and what exactly the nature of his involvement is going to be.
I had that same thought whenever I was reading issue 4. I thought, like you said, it was sold to us as a very Superman-centric thing by Jeff Johns himself, and yet he's been on one panel. And you remember the first teaser art had Superman coming apart into cog, like pieces of a clock with Doc Manhattan's face in the background, and it was like this iconic image.
Or even the logo for the entire thing is a mixture of the classic Watchmen logo with the bloody Superman S. And so it's like, it's interesting, that just hasn't been a major part of the story yet. I'm sure it's coming, and I'm sure it'll all make sense in the end. But I mean, a third of the way through, practically no Superman is a bit surprising to me.
Same, and I feel like I'm kind of with you there. I think that we'll be seeing a lot more Marvel Supes in the coming issues, probably maybe even by the next issue, which will be out near the end of next month. But moving on from there, Joe, what are your impressions of Doomsday Clock so far, and have you read all 4 of the issues that have come out?
I have read all 4, and I just, what you guys just said, I'm very surprised we haven't seen more of Superman, because that was sort of the main thing Jeff Johns sort of stressing, that this was going to be a Superman-heavy sort of story, along with the Watchmen tied in. But also to piggyback off what Nick was saying, I think Gary Frank has just been on top of his game. I mean, you go back to some of his work previously when he first got started at Marvel with Avengers and doing Supreme Power, and moving to DC with Jeff Johns and doing all that they did. I don't think his work's ever been better. It's just amazing to me to see how he's come for so far, and it's like just such consistent work out of him that it's just almost, easily to say that he's one of the best artists over the last decade and a half.
Fully agreed. Frank has always impressed me. I haven't seen any bad artwork from him, and I'm personally looking forward to him to doing more Superman after his previous turn on it with Jeff Johns in Superman Secret Origin, and in my favorite Superman story of all time, Superman Brainiac. But I know, Greg, you are the one among us who has not read all the current issues of Doomsday Clock, but of what you have read, what has been your overall impression of what Jeff Johns and Gary Frank are doing here?
Well, as Nick alluded to, it's no secret that I am a Jeff Johns homer. I pretty much enjoy everything he's done since he arrived at DC in the early 2000s. But I think with this, I approach this with a little bit of trepidation, because Watchmen is hallowed ground, as we all know from our experience with comic book theater.
That's right.
Watchmen is hallowed ground, and not just anyone can lay their hands on this property and do it justice.
Or lay other parts on it.
Exactly, as we may or may not be doing with comic book theater. But Watchmen is this sort of sacred cow of sorts. They did the Before Watchmen project and had kind of mixed results, some good, some bad. And so I was a little trepidatious, even though it was Jeff Johns and Gary Frank, and they're a great creative team. But I was blown away. I've only read the first 2 issues, not for lack of want, but for lack of ability in the last couple months due to circumstances. But I've been blown away. I thought just with that first issue, just coming out of the gates, firing. They both talked about Gary Frank, and I can't add too much more to that, but I love the way that he's mirroring what Dave Gibbons did with his layouts and his panels in the original Watchmen, and which I think I've always said that Watchmen was the best pairing of the best match of two creators in perfect lockstep with one another, with Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. I don't know that we've ever seen in our medium the two that complemented each other that much, and that were both so utterly essential to telling the story. And I think that Frank and Johns thus far are if not matching that, then they're coming as close as you can get to it. And I thought that first issue was just a masterclass in how you set up a story like this and how you go about telling a story that so many people are going to go into automatically opposed to. So I've been very much enjoying it.
To segue from that, would you say that issue 1 was your favorite issue so far of the 2 that you've read?
Yes, I would. Just primarily because of how I didn't know what to expect from it. I didn't know if it was going to be something wildly different from Watchmen. I didn't know if it was going to be something exactly the same as Watchmen. And what I got was something that I did not anticipate. I got something that was true to the spirit of Watchmen, which I thought would be the most difficult challenge, to remain true to the spirit while not just mimicking the story. And I think seeing some of these characters come back in various forms, and the way that they use the world of Watchmen was very, very interesting. And I thought a really compelling way to follow up the sort of open-endedness of the original work. For those who know the story very well, it ends after Ozymandias's big reveal that he has succeeded seemingly in his plan to unite the world against this common threat. But there's that open-endedness of Rorschach's journal, and this takes that and follows it through to its logical conclusion, which I was really impressed by.
I will agree with, especially with that last part, like seeing the follow-up of Rorschach's journal, something that was left open-ended and completely ambiguous, as Alan Moore tends to do with many of his stories. It was interesting to see how Jeff Johns imagined the end of that story, or the follow-up to it, and I feel like it's kind of giving us a look inside his head as to how he interpreted Watchmen, because that's exactly how Doomsday Clock is going to be. This is not the official sequel to Watchmen, I suppose. It's Jeff Johns' interpretation of it,
right.
And he should be absolutely free to take whatever liberties he likes, since it is his story. But moving on to other folks on the panel's favorite issue, Joe, of the issues you've read, which Doomsday Clock issue has been your favorite so far?
Well, I think it would probably have to be number 3, I think, to this point. I think just, of course, the amazing opening, and of course the shocking opening we get between the comedian and Dr. Manhattan, and you flash forward to just Batman and Rorschach's hilarious interactions with one another.
That is actually my favorite issue as well. Having that Batman and Rorschach interaction was really funny. But there was also the JSA stuff that was interspersed throughout, and some of the stuff in the back of the issue. Did you notice all that, like the supplemental material? It was very similar to how Watchmen used Under the Hood as a,
right.
parallel, or as a call out to the events that are happening. The stuff that's included in the back of every issue of Doomsday Clock seems to be doing that same thing, and giving you possibly clues.
Yeah, I mean, typically stuff like that is such. Stuff like that is so typically filler or just waste for a lot of books, but I mean that's stuff that's very important, just like the original Watchmen.
It really is. It is. It's must-read material in order for you to get the full meat of the story, and that was part of why Doomsday Clock number 3 was really hitting with me, aside from also seeing Mime use his invisible weapons again and use them to great effect, which is going to always be like Mime and Marionette are going to be my I think the highlights of this story for me. I hope they're sticking around after it's all over. But Nick, what was your favorite issue so far?
Yeah, issue 3 for me as well. I mean, like you said, you get the Batman Rorschach interaction. You get a little bit taste of the comedian still being alive, or at least implied to have still been alive. And then you also get this implication about how, you know, the major difference between these two universes is that superpowers seem to be a lot more prevalent. What with, you know, we're shown Mime and Marionette earlier in the series, and the implication is that they're just really skilled fighters and that he doesn't actually have these invisible weapons. And then in issue 3, you kind of get this reveal of maybe things are working a little bit differently here. And that was a cool moment to go out on. So, you know, loved them all thus far, but issue 3 has been my favorite.
I also really liked how they finally revealed how those two characters factor into Ozymandias' plan. How he was going to try and get through to John, because as it turned out, Dr. Manhattan had encountered Mime and Marionette in a bank robbery and could have easily killed both of them. But instead of doing that, he spared their lives because he could see into Marionette's womb and see that she was pregnant. So Ozymandias has this idea that he can appeal to Manhattan's humanity, if there's any left, using someone that he had spared previously. So that's I found that to be an interesting perspective for Ozymandias anyway. And of course the supplemental stuff in the back, that's going deep on some JSA stuff and making me think that Jeff Johns really is putting those characters back into their more traditional place within the DC universe, or at least they will be once his event has concluded. So
we can only hope so.
Yes, I'd be very on board with the idea of the JSA being back to where they once were. And I'm still wondering how the Legion factors into this, because that's still another dangling thread that Jeff Johns has promised to follow up on. Speaking of dangling threads and interesting moments, Nick, has there been a moment in this story so far that you would consider like really surprising or like shocking in any way?
You know, the moment, like I referenced earlier, with the reveal of Mime actually using what would appear to be an invisible gun at the end of issue 3 was pretty shocking to me. Comedian being implied to still be alive was definitely a shock for me as well. I was not as shocked by the Rorschach reveals. I know a lot of people were. While I didn't necessarily peg that character in particular, I knew he had to have a connection to one of only 2 like prominent minority characters from the original story. So I kind of had a narrow list of suspects for the new Rorschach.
Sure.
Going into that. So yeah, most of the surprises I would say came in that 3rd issue.
My bet was our old pal Lewis Maynard.
Yes.
Yeah, that would have been the way to go. All shucky ducky quack quack.
When the reveal of the new Rorschach happened, did you sniff hard enough to actually inhale part of your lower body?
No, because I actually I was thinking that it might have actually been Dr. Long himself who would have survived somehow and basically gone through some rigorous physical transformation because of his scarring at the hands of Rorschach, essentially remade himself even in old age. So
sure.
I figured he had a connection to him. I thought it might be him exactly, but I did not see the sun thing coming because I don't even remember his kids playing a role. I think they were mentioned very offhandedly, so nothing that would have lent itself to such a tease, I guess.
Yeah, there was nothing in the original Watchmen that said anything, really about his kids other than an offhand comment. Nothing that would lead you to believe that this is who it would be. So the reveal of the new Rorschach was a bit of a surprising moment for me, but I think the biggest shock, like to my system, was in issue 1 when the comedian is revealed to be alive. That really floored me, and as soon as I was done with the issue, I was like, I need some explanation. I need issue 2 right now. And I think that's a mark of Jeff Johns' ability as a writer to give you something like that right at a key moment and have you fully invested in a story. So that would be my pick. Joe, what's been the most surprising or shocking moment to you so far in this story?
I have to say, like what you said about the comedian at the end of issue 1, and then how that follows up on issue 3 with Dr. Man. I'm really curious about what's coming forward. I think there's going to be some huge shocks still to come. So I think what we've seen so far is just the tip of the iceberg. I will say that I think one thing, the least surprising thing to me, if I can go with a least surprising thing, was Rorschach ended up eating Batman's pancakes.
Yes, because they looked delicious. They were just sitting there. I mean, they were going to get cold otherwise. I mean, it's not like Bruce was going to come around and eat them anytime soon. So, Greg, most surprising moment of the series so far?
I think for me, and again, my exposure to it is much more limited than the rest of the panels, but I think for me so far, the biggest surprise to me is just how funny it's been. Because that is, of all of the things that I talked about expecting going in, like, is it going to be its own thing? Is it going to be a clone of Watchmen? What's it going to be? The one thing I was certain it wouldn't be was funny. And I thought it would be really grim and really dark like Watchmen was. But at times, it almost feels like Jeff Johns' answer to Watchmen that kind of at times pokes fun at a lot of the superhero cliches. And it feels like at times Doomsday Clock pokes fun at some of the cliches that followed Watchmen about the self-seriousness of characters and things like that. And I was not expecting to have so many laugh-out-loud moments. Mime and Marionette, Rorschach. There were just so many funny moments in that first and in the second issue that I was not expecting to have in a book that is tackling universe-shaping ramifications, right? Yeah. And it literally made me laugh out loud several times when I was reading both issues. And that's something that it's hard for comics to do a lot of times, but Johns and Frank pulled it off. And it's not just Johns' writing, because Frank is essential to pulling off these comedic scenes, especially the kind of deadpan moments that happen. They're so great.
Yes, they are. And do you also get the sense, I don't know if any of you guys picked up on this, but it kind of feels almost in a way that Jeff Johns has been working towards this idea of not just restoring the DC universe as we all know and love it, but maybe giving the Watchmen characters a chance for some form of redemption. Like maybe that's where he's headed with all this. Does that
yeah.
seem...
For some of the Watchmen characters, that may be true, and then there are others I don't think that are going to be afforded that same opportunity.
Some of them.
Yeah.
I was thinking that maybe for like Ozymandias, maybe.
Yeah.
Potentially for, well, this new Rorschach doesn't really seem to need like a redemption moment necessarily, but it does seem to me like he's trying to undo some of the dark and grittiness that came about as a result of Watchmen back in the 80s.
And I almost think that it especially with the character of Ozymandias, because I think ultimately this story is going to end up, I mean, and I could be very wrong, this is just a prediction, I think it will end up being a redemption for Dr. Manhattan, regaining perhaps a little bit of his humanity, maybe in the end. But I also think that it's certainly a chance. Perhaps Johns is taking on Ozymandias, because the ultimate lesson that Ozymandias, the character, took out of Watchmen over the course of the Watchmen history is that this very cynical idea that the only thing that could prevent utter catastrophe was another catastrophe. And death and murder and all of the and distrust and cynicism were the only things that could bring people together. And I think this is a chance to maybe answer that in a different way.
Yeah, I would say that's
for that character.
Sure. And speaking of Rorschach, Greg, I know you've had it spoiled for you, obviously, who he turned out to be. What are your thoughts on that?
I love it. I absolutely love it, because to me, that is actually a much more clever and interesting way to pick up a loose thread from Watchmen than if it had been outright shown that Dr. Long went home and mistreated his family, or showed him in his household just being harmful in some way, emotionally or otherwise, to his wife and kids. I think it's much better to take what the character shifts that we saw in Dr. Long and kind of extrapolate those and examine how those character shifts would have affected his family long term. I liken it to something like Scott Snyder in The Black Mirror when he introduces James Gordon Jr., who was a very minor character that was mentioned and perhaps seen very briefly in in Batman Year One and some other, or Long Halloween. Some other stories like that, you might have heard references to this young son, but nothing had ever been done with him. And Snyder takes this dangling thread and turns it into this brand new character with strong motivations and a tense backstory that's compelling. So I really enjoyed reading about this reveal. I would have preferred to read it in the comic, but Twitter removed that option for me. So but no, I actually think it's a really clever way of building on the foundation of Watchmen without running over the same ground.
Yes, I very much appreciated that they didn't just resurrect Walter Kovacs in the same way that the comedian was, say, resurrected. Though I'm still waiting for a firm explanation on the comedian and to see what the ultimate follow-up is with him. But that's got to be something to come. Joe, I want to get your thoughts on the new Rorschach, what your overall impression of him is, and what do you think about his origin story in issue 4?
Yeah, I thought his origin story done, and I especially love that. This is what I think Jeff Johns really excels at, where they go back to his Brainiac story, which I know you love. And just the emotional sort of resonance he's able to get out of a character, especially one that you don't necessarily feel that strongly toward. I mean, I didn't really have a strong feeling about him 3 issues in, but that 4th issue just leaves you sort of really caring about this character in a way that you didn't really think you wanted.
Very much agreed. He's one of those that you hadn't really seen a lot with. I mean, you'd seen him in some funny scenes, but you're right, that emotional connection wasn't quite there yet. But then when we get his full origin story, which is pretty much the entirety of issue 4, you can't help but latch on to him. What do you think about his interactions with Mothman in the insane asylum?
That's about as perfect and hilarious of writing as you could get. I'm not sure anybody like Bendis could do something like that. I mean, but Jeff Johns did it just as good, if not better.
It was one of my favorite scenes of the entire series, is that whole exchange between them. I was not prepared for a fully nude Mothman spreading his wings and going and sailing off into the night. That was... I guess I've just never been exposed to Gary Frank drawing a fully exposed ass, but there it was. And now you've been exposed to Mothman.
Nice ass.
As it was that, and then it was like the full moon sails off into the full moon. Like, well done, Jeff Johns and Gary Frank. I like the pun. I approve. Now, Nick, we're coming back around to you said a good bit on Rorschach already, but what was your overall impression of him so far, and what did you think of his origin issue?
I've enjoyed the character to this point. I think they've done enough to illustrate the similarities between he and the original Walter Kovacs, while also having him feel and read like a slightly, different and distinct character unto himself. And like Greg said, the origin was kind of brilliant. I mean, rather than having Dr. Long become a sociopath, they just kind of had it play out in a more subtle fashion, and yet one that was still kind of tragic for his family. It all worked for me, and like you said, Mothman was great, and it just made me wish that, if we can get Mothman in the pages of this, are there other ancillary side Watchmen characters that could be brought up, that could be, maybe voiced in an edition of Comic Book Theater or something like that? Yeah.
Some that may, hail from a certain city. I don't think we have to say its name here. I would even go for certain ones who use dollar signs in their attire.
That would be fine.
I could get on board with that. Now, this story, we've talked about this story having a lot of kinship with the original Watchmen, especially the most noticeable being the panel layout. Evokes all sorts of Dave Gibbons' art. So we know that from that perspective, but from the writing standpoint, from the story overall, Nick, have you picked out any major parallels where you're reading it and you're like, wow, this is a really cool link back to the original Watchmen?
Nothing overt to this point, because, one of the things about Watchmen is I think we all have had the experience now of interacting with it primarily through graphic novel, through a collected edition, where it's easier to pick up some of those narrative similarities and some of these callbacks and stuff when you read it in a single sitting. Especially now with Doomsday Clock going to a bi-monthly publication schedule, or semi-monthly, whichever the term is. I always get those mixed up. But anyway, every other month, essentially, I find myself forgetting a lot of the finer details, honestly, between issues, which is problematic, to say the least. But I'm looking forward to being able to have a chance to go back and read them all in a single sitting at some point. But no, to answer your question, primarily the thing I've noticed are the artistic parallels and some of the imagery, obviously, that's being used over and over again. But from a narrative standpoint, I haven't really picked up on any direct parallels to this point.
There was one that jumped out at me, and it's if you remember, the Keene Act was a big part of Watchmen's middle chapters when they're talking about superheroes or vigilantes being outlawed. And when we come to Doomsday Clock, something similar is happening with Batman. The people are seemingly very against Batman and his little Bat family, his little crusade. So much so that now it seems politicians are getting involved. Lex Luthor is making a bid to buy out Wayne Enterprises, and Bruce seems so distracted because of his time as Batman that it could very well happen. So those two things, the people being kind of anti-vigilante in both of these stories, seems to be like a parallel that at least that I noticed between the two. We'll see how it plays out. It's still early yet in the story, but that was something that just kind of stuck in my craw, and I haven't been able to fully let go of it since I started reading the series. Joe, what parallels have you noticed between the original Watchmen and Doomsday Clock?
I think the most obvious one, and the one that sort of grabbed me right from the start, was the parallels of what happened in 1985, and then you spread this out to 1992, and it's still very relevant to what's going on right now as it relates to nuclear war, Russia, North Korea, even to the hilarious image of the president and the golf clubs laying on the camera there, which I think was a really nice touch.
Yeah, I dug that too.
That's a really good point that he brings up that I hadn't thought about, the kind of socio-political ties of the original Watchmen kind of being brought full circle and being just as relevant today as they were then, and just changing some of the names and some of the places and some of the figures. That's a very good point. I actually hadn't considered that, but yeah, that's a great point. I think that's part of the the whole point of this project in some ways.
And did you also notice that the President of the United States in 1992, as far as the Watchmen universe is concerned, is Robert Redford?
which is a great expansion off of what
Alexander
we see.
Pierce himself.
Yes, he's hailing Hydra all the way to the White House, and now we've really crossed over. But Greg, I guess that was like your most noticeable parallel to the original.
Well, actually, no, because I hadn't really considered it fully until Joe brought it up. Because it's been a few months since I've read the 2 issues that I've read. But I was, other than the art, which I think is obvious to us that are big fans of the original and how much Gibbons' art has influenced what Frank is doing right now. I was just going to say, from the really honing in on the first issue, which I remember the best. If you remember, Watchmen starts out with Rorschach's journal entry, and he's very, the world is going to hell in a handbasket. And then it almost becomes this team building thing. But he's not building a team. He's actually going around to warn people about this mass killer that's out there. And in a way, the first issue, it plays out a little bit like that, where Rorschach is going around to get Mime and Marionette and gathering them together as part of this team to come together with Ozymandias. So I think that's a parallel as well, just in a little bit of a different format. Like, this is like more of a, let's get a team together to do this mission, whereas in the original, it was Rorschach going around trying to convince people there's a mass killer out there, and everybody kind of shoots him down, and nobody actually comes together. At least in the beginsilk. So.
Yeah, and we're all still kind of waiting around to find out what exactly happened to Night Owl and to
Silk Spectre.
Silk Spectre, yeah. Like we're all still wondering just exactly what has happened to these characters. They've been mentioned kind of offhand, but I feel like we need to see them at some point. Maybe. I
think my ideal ending for Night Owl, though, is that he suffered a debilitating stroke while having sex and either passed away or is in a vegetative state.
Well, as we see in the comic and in the movie adaptation, he does come like fire.
Yes, only when he's in costume, though.
But yes, only while in costume. Well, that kind of brings us to the end of the first half here. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the big one that I know has been fresh on everybody's mind lately. Brian Michael Bendis has made his debut with DC Comics in the pages of Action Comics 1000, but there's a lot to unpack within that issue that I would personally describe as a beautiful love letter to the Man of Steel. So if you guys will hang with us for just a little while, we will be right back.
Promotional consideration paid for by the following.
Hey, pro wrestling announcer Kevin Kelly here. I want to make sure you are all subscribed to all the great feeds here at Place to Be Nation. It's really easy to do. Just head to iTunes or your preferred podcatcher app today and search and subscribe to the Place to Be Nation wrestling feed, which of course includes the full archives of the Kevin Kelly Show, the Place to Be Nation pod feed, and the Pro Wrestling Only feed. Subscribe, listen, and then rate us and leave feedback today. And be sure to give Justin your true thoughts. I mean, don't hold back. After all, he is kind of a jerk. Just listen to Scott.
Place to Be Nation's JT Rosero and Chad Campbell here. We want to let you know that we have a ton of great podcasts available to you on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and PlayStation.com, and we offer those to you on 3 great feeds. On the Place to Be Nation Wrestling feed, we bring you the Mothership, the original Place to Be podcast, as well as Main Event, Lucha Afterground, and our monthly pay-per-view reaction shows, as well as the Our Vantage Point podcast and Jeff Learns Wrestling. In addition to these full-length shows, we also deliver quick-hit pod blasts on topics old and new.
Over on the Pro Wrestling Only feed, we dive deep inside the wrestling business with a stacked army of experts leading the way. The feed features potpourri shows such as This Week in Wrestling, Greetings from Allentown, Psychology is Dead, Puro Puri, Stacy and Elliot's Bogus Journey, and the Military Industrial Suplex. We also have shows that focus intently on certain topics like Letters from Center Stage, Space City, and NWA Classics on Demand Adventure, Through the Years, Strong Style History, Strong Style Story, and Mount Olympus. Plus, the feed has the full archives of legendary shows like Titans of Wrestling, Where the Big Boys Play, Letters from Kayfabe, and much more. And on our popular Place to Be Nation Pop podcast feed, we offer such great shows as the Glenn Butler Podcast Hour Spectacular, Rank and File, PTBN Dadcast, Go Home in a Box, NBA Team, and Lucha Undead, as well as a veritable podcast heaven for comics fans with the Hard-Traveling Fanboys, Sellers Points, Todd Weber's Conversation, Geek and Sassy, and Imaginary Stories podcasts.
You can find all of these current shows plus archives of our past podcasts, including The Kevin Kelly Show, as well by subscribing to all of our feeds on iTunes, and while there, be sure to rate and leave feedback as well. All of these shows, plus others, available on PlaceToBeNation.com, where we cover pro wrestling, sports, movies, comics, plus in-depth stretch projects and more. Be sure to support our site by using PlaceToBeNation.com/Amazon when shopping online, and download our free PTB Vintage Vault Refresh ebooks via the links on our site. We also want to thank our friends at Bonehead's Wing Bar in West Warwick, Rhode Island, and Fall River, Massachusetts, TheHistoryOfWrestling.com, and Scott Keats' Blog of Doom. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr as well. PlaceToBeNation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.
Place to Be Nation, it is me, the manager, Todd Weber, and I'm here to tell you all about a brand new show on the PTBN Pop feed. It's Talkin' Pop. Each month, hosts Jennifer Smith and Tim Capel discuss the hottest topics in pop culture along with their special guests. Funny, illuminating, and even sometimes a bit naughty, Talkin' Pop is our latest and greatest legendary Place to Be Nation podcast. So be sure to join Jenny and Tim every single month on Talkin' Pop, proudly part of the PTBN Pop feed on iTunes, Stitcher, and PlaceToBeNation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.
Welcome back, Place to Be Nation Pop. We're going to dive right in the second half of the current events episode, talking about Action Comics 1000. This has been a long time coming. Since 1938, they've been working on this one. And in fact, this is the 80th anniversary of Superman, so it's all connected. You see, there's no conspiracy here. What am I talking about? Who knows? Anyway. We're just going to get right into Action Comics 1000. This is a landmark issue that just came out last week as of this recording, and was actually met very well by most critics and most fans. I think they enjoyed the issue. There was certainly, I think, something for every type of Superman fan within these pages. And to back me up on that will be my... maybe the guy who's an even bigger Superman fan than me. Greg, I got to ask you, how important do you think Action Comics 1000 is as a comic and as a Superman story?
So, I think that whether you're a Superman fan or not, for anyone listening out there, this is a landmark issue on any level. Regardless of your fandom for Superman or your fandom of DC Comics, even if you're a strictly Marvel fan, you have to understand that without Superman, there's none of this. There are none of these superheroes that we love. There are no Iron Man, Captain America, all these heroes we see on the big screen. There's none of that without this one. And to reach 1,000 issues of a comic series, I mean, that speaks volumes, not just about the power of Superman, the long-lasting nature of Superman, but beyond just a statement on the character and the creation of Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, but it's about the medium of comics and superhero comics, and something that could have been a passing fad in the 30s and 40s that very nearly died out in the 50s, that could have died out in the 70s or the early 80s or the 2000s or the late 90s, just continues to build on itself and build on itself and build on itself, and has stood the test of time. While other fads have come and gone, comics are still there, and superheroes are still there and thriving in a way that many of us never thought they would. And that all goes back to Action Comics #1. And the fact that we're getting a comic book with 4 digits in its numbering is just staggering. So I don't think you can oversell the importance of this issue to DC, to Marvel, to comics in general, to the form of comic books. Because when you finish this issue, you're going to have, like you said, Russell, something for every type of Superman fan. There's funny, there's serious, there's action, there's sadness in there. It's everything is combined into one. There's all different art styles, because Superman is for everyone, as we know. And in addition to that, comic books are for everyone. And to reach 1,000 is a kind of landmark that, yes, Detective Comics is going to get there too, hopefully. But Action got there before anybody else and has managed to stay in publication for 80 years. It's just remarkable.
It really is, and it's a huge issue too. It's an 80-page. It's, fittingly enough, an 80-pager, and I don't feel like there's any wasted space in here. I feel like they made the most of every page. It's 80 pages and 0 ads, which is another thing that I really appreciated about it. Even though I guess you could call some of the pinups in there as like house ads or whatever, are just like.
Yeah, but they're beautiful.
They really are. The pinups are really impressive. I even like the John Romita Jr. one, which I haven't really been high on his Superman work for the most part, but this was good.
The Walt Simonson one was incredible.
Yeah, it is. And I'm also a big fan of the Jorge Jimenez one. Not a bad one in the bunch. There are no bad pinups here. But moving on from that, we know that my own level of enjoyment of this issue, I've already said. I think that I'll echo everything that you've said there, Greg, about its level of importance, why this matters. But Joe, what were your thoughts on how important Action Comics 1000 is to Superman and to DC Comics overall?
Well, I think Greg laid it out really perfectly, and I think just spinning off of that as well is, after they create Superman, DC basically goes and says, okay, what are we going to do next? Well, we get Batman, we get Wonder Woman, we get Green Lantern, we get the Flash, we get all of that. And then 25 some odd years later, Stan Lee has all this amazing Marvel stuff that just blows up the comic industry, and we have what we have now. So none of that is possible without Superman and without Action Comics #1. So I think we all owe a huge debt of gratitude to Siegel and Shuster and Action Comics.
We absolutely do. This is what birthed the genre. Greg, will you help me out there?
Genre
that we all love, the superhero genre, and without it, we don't have the comics medium as we know it today. The comics medium could very well have died out because prior to Superman, prior to superheroes, comics were and still are actually as varied as what you find at your local theater or on television. There are, horror, there's western, action, comedy, romance even. It does exist. It actually still exists today. But like the movies, it's superheroes that everybody's flocking to and that everybody's spending their money on, that helps to kind of prop things up a little bit. But that said, Nick, how important would you say that Action Comics 1000 is to the medium and maybe even to you personally?
For me personally, I'll start with that first. I'm not nearly the Superman fan that you guys are. My appreciation of Superman has only really even started to become a thing in like the last 5 years or so, and there are still aspects of the character that I find problematic for my personality style and are difficult for me to fully embrace. So I kind of run hot or cold on the Superman. Superman as a character. I will say the Rebirth stuff to this point has been very good for the most part. I've enjoyed pretty much everything they've done with him thus far, and so for me personally, it was a big deal just because of the historical significance of hitting 1,000. But I can't say it necessarily was this like big moment that had been built to the way it was for probably you guys as lifelong Superman fans. But without any shadow of a doubt, it's a huge deal from a historical comics perspective. 4 digits in a run is just it's unheard of. I mean, it's incredible, and it was certainly apropos that DC was going to put all of this promotional effort behind it, get the true A-list talent to really bring everybody together for this celebration of Superman, who, like I said, is a character that I may not have the greatest affinity for, but he undoubtedly deserves all the accolades he's getting right now and all of the attention that is being sent his way. So that's kind of where I was going into it.
And this is actually a good point to segue into my next question. What was your favorite story from the issue?
I thought, for me anyway, hands down, it was the Tom King and Clay Mann written one. If I have to, the only criticism I really have of the issue, honestly, is I know this was it formatted as something of an anthology style book where it was kind of these little snapshots, and DC has done some of these in the past, but I always feel like, or I felt like in the past when they've done similar concepts, there's at least been one story that was long enough to really give you some narrative meat to it, and these were more, I think, what was the longest one, Russell? Like 6 pages, I think, max for each of these.
Yeah,
they were pretty in and out, and I wish there had been one with a little bit more meat on the bone, so to speak. But of these little snapshots, I thought the Tom King one that featured Superman making his final visit to a dying planet Earth, that was the one that hit for me in a big way. I thought it brought the emotion. I thought it felt authentic for the character, and the art was fantastic. It was the one that really, tugged at the heartstrings for me.
That was a big one for me as well. And there are so many of these stories that I absolutely loved, and it was hard to narrow it down for me. I mean, that's a good pick. Of Tomorrow's a damn fine Superman story. Kind of makes me hope that Tom King gets to take a real swing at the character someday. But I think and man, this is still tough. This is still so hard because there are several of these that I really love, but I keep coming back to 5 Minutes by Louise Simonson and Jerry Ordway.
Dude, I'm so glad you said that because I thought I was going to be the only one. But go ahead.
No, but that's my one that I keep coming back to because it's so classic tongue-in-cheek Superman. Here he is as Clark Kent, primarily in the story or at the beginning of it, on a tight deadline, trying real hard to meet that story deadline, working his ass off to get there, and Perry's breathing down his neck, but at the same time he's hearing all this stuff is happening around Metropolis that in a way almost seemed like it could be a coordinated attack, and if the story had been written a certain way, you could have actually framed it as that, as someone trying to spread Superman too thin to actually be able to stop what was really going on in the background. But the way Louise Simonson wrote the story was, I guess, a little bit more innocent than that. It was just Superman trying to stop all these things while also trying to keep up with his day job, only to find that at the end of it, whenever he's racing back in, it's my favorite moment of the story, right at the end, he's got 90 seconds left to hit his deadline. He manages to get back to the Daily Planet, gets the story written, turns it in, and then Perry says, hey, Superman has been doing all this stuff all over town. This story you've been working on all this time is kind of old news now. I need you and Olsen to get out there and cover all the stuff Superman was doing. And it's such a little thing, but on the last I think it's the last panel of the story, Superman is looking at the reader and giving this little like eye roll kind of thing that only Clark Kent could deliver. And that moment hit with me in such a big way that I was like, this is my Superman. This is the kind of like funny adventure and just straight up fun that Superman can be. So that was my one that I just kept coming back to. But after you guys give your picks, I'll mention the other two that or three that I just couldn't get enough of and wish they were, like Nick said, I wish they were a little bit longer. But Joe, of these stories, what was your favorite?
Besides all of them?
Yes, besides all of them.
Well, I was going to mention real quick, I'm actually looking through the issue, and Jurgens and Tomasi Gleason, we each got 15 pages, so they got a pretty decent amount.
Oh, wow.
A good story, I think.
That's right.
The ones I go to would be the Car by Jeff Johns and Richard Donner and Oliver Copiel. I thought was really good. I think that one, and I would say Faster Than a Speeding Bullet by Meltzer and Cassidy, I think really sort of speak to me of what I sort of think about when Superman inspires me, when I want to be better than who I think I am at times. I think that's part of what we all love, even if you're not the biggest Superman fan. But I think those two really stick out. But I really like the Paul Dini one. I know it wasn't the really perfect per se, but I really enjoyed it just for the fact that towards the end of the issue, towards the end of the story, you could read Mr. Mixlip Pixley and Gilbert Gottfried.
Oh, absolutely. And it almost felt like a lost episode of the animated series, didn't it?
Yes, it did. Very much agree.
Absolutely.
And also the only time, and for the first time in a long time, we got Jose Luis Garcia Lopez back on Superman art.
And oh my God, it was amazing. Like, I have seen, like, okay, I grew up in the era after, like, he was the DC, like, he and Neil Adams were kind of the guys in the 70s era DC, right? Early 80s. So he was before my generation of growing up reading. And when he's done some, like, one-off, like, pinups and things like that in the last maybe decade, and they've been okay, they've been solid, but I've always kind of been like, I haven't really seen the big deal. This dude, okay, I've seen his Prime stuff. His Prime stuff is amazing. This dude comes back with this issue and looks like he could take over a monthly comic if he wanted to right now, because I thought the art in that segment was phenomenal. Incredible Superman, incredible Mixie, all of it was great.
It's classic
the
stuff.
art in this book is perfect.
Yes.
Absolutely. There's no bad art in this book. None. Even on stories that I wasn't as high on, and I know it's because the art is from a different story, and it was a story that was being adapted around it by Marv Wolfman called An Enemy Within.
Right.
That one, and I got to admit, Faster Than a Speeding Bullet didn't hit with me quite as much as it hit with other folks. Not that they were necessarily bad at all. There's no bad story here, as far as I'm concerned. But those two were the ones that I would put at the bottom of the list. And I'm glad, Joe, that you mentioned the car.
For me, the ending of Faster Than a Speeding Bullet really hit.
Good ending. I think it was just the build up to it.
Yeah. I just love the dialogue. At the end, I meet a good one every day. You know what I'm saying, Clark? People always say they're inspired by you, but I know your real secret. You're the one inspired by them.
Yeah, Meltzer crafted a great ending, and he made a very strong point about Superman. So, and the John Cassaday art was really good. Felt very almost 60s or 70s Superman. The car, though, my God, what a great story. Jeff Johns and Richard Donner really killed it on that one. But Greg, we got to ask you. I know
those stories are only 5 pages long.
Yeah, really, like this. It's such an amazing thing that they crafted that emotional of a story and put it in such a small space. But Greg, I think you're picking the same one I picked, aren't you?
Yes. I wanted to real quick say the two choices, like there were so many good stories here, and I think the three that I was going between as my favorite were Faster Than a Speeding Bullet by Meltzer and Cassidy. Particularly Cassidy's art. I've always liked his art, but this dude has to be on Superman. He just has to be, because it might have been my favorite art in the entire book. Like it was so perfect. And I don't know that I ever wanted Cassidy to draw Superman, but now I do, because I've seen it, and it's glorious. But that was one, and then obviously Of Tomorrow, as Nick mentioned, by Tom King and Clay Mann. Just a heart-wrenching story. And you know me and my love of the Kents, Russell.
Yes. Which I share, by the way.
Yes, I believe that they are much more essential to the Superman mythos than Jor-El and Lara. Which is, unfortunately, it seems that most writers in the comics tend to focus on the Jor-El and Lara aspect versus the Kent's aspect in recent years. But I'm hoping that's making a turn. But my favorite story, yes, I'm going to go with, I guess it's the old journalist in me, but 5 Minutes by Louise Simonson and Jerry Ordway, who are two creators that I think mean a lot to a generation of Superman fans. The fans that grew up reading the 90s Superman, the late 80s, early 90s Superman. These are two creators that left a mark. And it's been so wonderful in recent years to see Dan Jurgens come back and put his imprint back on the Man of Steel in a big, bad way. And now we're getting Wheezy and Ordway back for this story. And like you said, Russell, it just captures that classic feel. But even on a more nerdy and minutia level from that, I appreciate the genuineness of the journalism scenes, because Perry White in this issue, or in this story I should say, is written, it was hard for me not to picture my old boss Ken Tuck at the Dothan Eagle newspaper when I worked for him. The way that he would say things, he would compliment you, but he would do it in a way that would let you know, okay, we're on deadline, you need to get going, like, enough of this small chatter here. But he would do it in a nice way, not like a J. Jonah Jameson or something. So I really appreciated the journalism aspect. I appreciated the camaraderie in the newsroom, and I appreciated Superman. It's just a light, breezy Superman story. And I know that I'm only supposed to pick one, and that was my one. And I mentioned the Faster Than a Speeding Bullet and Of Tomorrow. And I think you guys have talked about The Car, which was amazing. I loved that one too, obviously. And Action Land, which was the Paul Dini one, which I loved as well. I also wanted to throw a little nod towards both of the first two, which were From the City That Has Everything by Dan Jurgens and Never Ending Battle by Tomasi and Gleason. And particularly to see Dan Jurgens on art again, in a little segment that's mainly just setting the stage, but to see him get to draw Superman again, because his was the Superman that I remember most from my childhood and probably will always be the most iconic to me. But that was really fun. And then I thought Tomasi and Gleason going through the eras of Superman was really fun and really cool. And it's just, top to bottom, this is such a great issue. I think other than An Enemy Within, which was kind of shoehorned into some existing Kurt Swan art, who's one of the great Superman artists. And then I think, oddly enough, there's also a little story in there called The Game that is not mentioned in the actual opening page that sets the stage for the book. But it's by Neil Adams, and I can't remember who the writer was on that. But it didn't really work for me that much. Like, the art was great, but the story was, I don't know, it was okay. But everything else in this book was phenomenal. I loved it all, Russell.
I'm right there with you.
A 5-minute story just reinforces that we need a Daily Planet book.
Yes.
Yes, it does. And I'm totally on board with you. Those first two stories, From the City That Has Everything, Dan Jurgens is my favorite Superman creator of ever. And seeing him on writing and art, this story was the perfect one to kick this issue off with. And I'm right there with you on Never Ending Battle, like going through all the eras of Superman and doing it in the context of Vandal Savage, utilizing hyper time, which is something that you so very rarely see. They even paid tribute to Superman the Animated Series.
Mm-hmm.
There's a on a single page with Superman seemingly trapped in the Phantom Zone, you've got two characters, two rogue Kryptonians from Superman the Animated Series standing at the bottom of the page. And I was like, this is so cool that he's doing this, or that they were able to work all of that in. Absolutely.
Along with the Phantom Zone Square from Superman the movie.
Absolutely. That's, I don't know. That was just a perfect moment. But the other story that I think we should definitely pay a little tribute to before we move on is the 5th season by Scott Snyder and Raphael Albuquerque, which I thought was a fantastic Superman and Luthor moment. Maybe one of the best they've ever had, with Lex telling the story of, the 5th season of Smallville, where he, grew up alongside Clark. It
almost felt, did it almost feel, Russell, that it could have been, and Joe, I think you watched the show too, it almost could have been in the far future of the Smallville series. That,
and it could have been playing off of Superman's Secret Origin.
Yes, true. Yeah.
It almost felt like a tribute to Superman's Secret Origin more so than anything, since it has Clark and Lex growing up alongside each other as like very young kids, and being friends from such an early age.
And the idea of Lex being so confident that he was the one that did all the work in his project, and then attributing his life being saved to just a stroke of luck, when in fact it was Clark there the whole time, kind of helping him along. And I also enjoyed the open-ended way that they chose to close the story as well.
And it also perfectly bleeds into Tom King and Clayman's story. I thought the placement of those two being beside each other was perfect.
So the weird thing coming out of this story is, like, I know that there's oversaturation, so it'll never happen, or shouldn't happen. But at the same time, we've got original graphic novels, we've got all kinds of format. I now want every single one of these artists to get a Superman book.
Right?
They're all so good.
Like, everybody came in here and was like, hey, I got one shot at drawing Superman. Let me do my best possible work on it. And it's like, holy shit!
I mean, Clayman, what can you say about his work in that story? Just tremendous.
I mean, the only artist I feel like is missing from this, for my money, as like modern guys, would be Jason Fabok. I wish they could have found some way to work him in, but I mean, but the murderer's row of creators on this is already stacked as it is. So I
wish they would have made that cover he did available.
Yes. By God, yes, that was the best cover of all the ones that came out, and it was a retailer exclusive. So if you had an extra $50 laying around, you could get it on eBay. It may be more than that now, but anyway, moving on to our next little topic. Greg, we're starting with you since we ended with you on the last one. What were your thoughts on Bendis' contribution to Action 1000?
Well, I think I have kind of complex thoughts on this, because I think the one thing that's interesting is the one issue that none of us mentioned, or the one story that none of us mentioned, was the one by Bendis and Jim Lee.
Yes.
And
I was hoping we were saving that for this.
Right. And I think that my mixed thoughts on it come from this standpoint. I think, first of all, the art is spectacular. I mean, you guys know Jim Lee is my favorite comic book artist of all time, and will probably always be. And I love the art. I think he draws an iconic, unforgettable Superman, and I think it's awesome that Bendis picked him to work alongside him in this landmark issue. Okay, it's hard for me to judge this story because it's really just a setup, right? It's a snippet of a setup for a future story. And unfortunately, I think what we get here, I thought to be, it's not bad by any means, but I think it's kind of generic when it's following what I thought were really economical and really iconic portrayals of Superman. And in this one, you're basically getting a Superman getting the crap beaten out of him, and then this shocking reveal at the end that perhaps because of my personal tastes and proclivities with Superman stories, didn't shock or didn't rattle me as much as it probably was intended to. And, because I didn't know what the big reveal was going to be at the end. And I was kind of underwhelmed by that. And so I think that, I think there's certainly potential here. I think Bendis's dialogue maybe harped on the red shorts a little bit too much. It was funny the first time, and then kind of, all right, let it go. But I didn't think it was bad, but I didn't think it was particularly good either. I thought it was just kind of there.
I can kind of get on board with what you're saying. I think I certainly enjoyed it more than you did, mostly because it's a big bombastic action scene.
Yes,
and that's pretty much what it is.
Absolutely, and it was a spectacular action scene, no question. And
we haven't had that actually through the entirety of this issue. Most of I think they did that on purpose. They saved the bombast for Bendis so that he could come in with a bit of a bang, if you will. And but I am kind of with you on the reveal of this character named Rogol. I guess Rogol Zar is how you would pronounce his name. And the big twist at the end, of course, being that he apparently knew Jor-El and told him that he was going to cleanse the universe of a Kryptonian sickness, or what he refers to as the Kryptonian sickness, as if Kryptonians actually are a disease on the universe. And of course, it ends with him seemingly stabbing Superman through the chest with this giant sword that had no trouble going through Superman's skin at all. And the big reveal that he's the one responsible for the destruction of Krypton. Now, we've heard something like that before. We've seen stories where Brainiac was responsible for the destruction of Krypton. And, of course, plenty of stories where Kryptonian hubris was responsible for the planet's destruction, an expanding star, all sorts of things. We've heard pretty much every version of the destruction of Krypton that could be. So is that part going to be particularly interesting? I don't know. But if the art continues to be good, like through the Man of Steel miniseries that's coming up, and with Ivan Reis drawing it, I have every confidence that it will be. I always dig how Bendis kind of writes out his action scenes. I've always thought that he did that really well, and he has a really creative mind when it comes to describing what he's seeing in his head. Yeah. And if he's working with a good artist, that can really get translated well to the page. So I'm a bit more intrigued than I think than what you were, Greg, and I'm certainly going to be buying Man of Steel when that starts up.
Certainly, yeah. Got to be in on that.
Yeah, it starts on May 30th. That's going to be a thing. I will certainly be in on it, and we will see how this plays out. But yeah, I will agree that it's a rather unremarkable debut, so to speak, but it's also not that long. So I'll probably say that maybe we should judge it more based on Man of Steel than this story.
Right, and we did. It's a rare occasion these days when you actually get a Jim Lee superhero comic out on the stand. So I'll take that when I can get it.
Yeah,
so.
he only had to draw a few pages this time, so
right.
Luckily, it all came together very well. Now, Joe, what were your thoughts on Bendis's contribution here to Action 1000? Did it hit for you? Did it miss? And your anticipation level for Man of Steel?
Well, it didn't quite hit, but it didn't really quite miss. I think really, though, it's more of an incomplete at this point. But the one thing I do take away from it, the feel for just the little story that it was, I got sort of a Superman Unchained sort of feel to it. Now, part of that might be due to Jim Lee drawing it. Yeah. But it sort of feels like that might be what Bendis may be going for in one of his titles. And if that's what he's going for, I'm going to love it. And right down to Jim Lee drawing that very first panel. I don't know if you guys noticed this, but it looks almost identically like one of the panels out of Batman Hush, where Batman hits Superman with the kryptonite ring. That very first panel looks almost like an instant recreation.
Yes,
it looks marvelous. So.
Yes, I agree. I'm glad you said the thing about Superman Unchained, because I had actually forgotten that from when I read it earlier, but I thought the same thing. I felt, even down to the villain, felt to me, looks-wise, not too far. I mean, he's definitely uniquely designed. He's a pretty ugly pretty ugly dude there. But he just the and his physical threat to Superman reminded me a little bit of Unchained, and I'm good with that because I think Unchained is one of the most maybe under-discussed Superman stories of the modern era. Certainly underrated. Unchained deserves to be talked about a little bit more than it gets. Kind of a pretty fun story, but Joe, are you definitely in for Man of Steel?
Well, yeah, I'm definitely going to be in on that. I'm definitely going to be in for the whole miniseries, and I anticipate I'll probably be pulling, Action and Superman as well.
Yep. Luckily for us, while Man of Steel is running, Superman and Action Comics are on hiatus. Or rather, Superman is being canceled, and we'll restart with a brand new #1 when Bendis starts his run. And then Action Comics will be on a break through the entire month of May, and I believe it's in June whenever it returns with Action Comics 1001. So they're going to keep right on going with the 4 digits. So that was something I was excited to hear, that they weren't going to just say, all right, we reached 1,000, let's stop and go to another volume. Very, very happy to know about that.
Well, don't give them any ideas, okay?
Oh, I'm trying not to. Hopefully no one from DC is listening to this, or rather do, but keep 4 digits. 4 digits is good. Now, Nick, you've been quiet for a little while, and I know this is going to be a topic that's got to be near and dear to your heart, because you may be the biggest Bendis fan that I know. So, what were your thoughts on Bendis' contribution here to Action 1000?
I've made no secret of the fact that as excited as I am for Brian Michael Bendis coming over to DC, I am a bit trepidatious when it comes to the idea of Bendis taking over the Superman line in its entirety. I love Bendis as a writer. He's one of my 2 or 3 favorite comic writers going today, if not of all time. But I don't think his sensibilities lend well to a character like Superman. Now, there are positive aspects, like him getting to write Lois, which we didn't see a ton of in this little short story, and that's something, arguably, the most interesting part of him taking over Superman is his ability to have a shot at writing Lois Lane, especially if you've read The Pulse during his Marvel run. All the Daily Planet stuff in his books should be fantastic. The little story here was just kind of okay. It like you guys said, it felt incomplete. Like, to draw a parallel to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Greg and I, on our last couple of episodes where we've reviewed Marvel movies, have discussed how we noticed this little trend they started to do where post-credit scenes weren't really post-credit scenes, but like actual scenes from the movies that were to follow. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if this was just literally a scene that was lifted from Man of Steel, presented out of context and without any follow-up. So we don't really know what exactly the deal is. I'm absolutely in on Man of Steel just because it's Bendis' first big, high-profile DC project. I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to be on board for both Superman and Action initially and see where it goes, but I still remain a little worried about his voice with Superman. I will say, unlike Greg, I actually loved the red pants jokes that he kept coming back to, because that was classic Bendis, and it was kind of poking fun at all the people who, the fans who just wouldn't let the red trunks thing go for years now, and by continuing to bring it up, I thought that was a nice little tongue-in-cheek way of needling the fan base a little bit.
It was also a follow-up on apparently a conversation that Bendis had with Dan DiDio. When DiDio came to him and said, or asked him if he wanted to put the red trunks back on Superman, and Bendis was like, "Yeah, sure. I didn't know they were gone." Apparently, he's not been up on the controversy of it all. So after DiDio said that to him, he started kind of deep diving onto the controversy of the red trunks, and decided to work that in as a joke into his story, because it was literally the first time he had ever heard it. So I thought that was, I'm kind of like you. I kind of enjoyed him putting that out there and saying, okay, well, let's, needle the fan base a little bit, because I'll be honest, I was kind of hoping the trunks were gone. And I'm a big fan of the current Superman look with the angled red belt and the yellow triangle emblem added into it. I thought that it works. Thought it felt like very classic Superman, and I mean, I don't really have much of an issue with the trunks coming back. It's whatever, but I was just really getting used to this Superman look, and we're going back, to this. But it's whatever. Costume design is what it is, and I'm still very much on board with Man of Steel. And like you, Nick, I'm going to be on Action and Superman whenever they begin. So I guess that kind of gives me your feelings on Bendis taking over both Superman books. Nick, you kind of segued into that as well. Do you have anything else you wanted to add on that?
No, not really. I just, we'll see how it goes, but I'm much more excited about the idea of Bendis doing virtually anything else at DC than I am the idea of him doing Superman.
That's fair enough. And this is just the beginning, so I'm sure he will.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
He has a big multi-year
Daily Planet.
Well, that's actually kind of been his pitch for Action Comics, is that Action Comics is going to be more focused on what's going on at the planet with Clark, the Clark side of his personality, and with Lois. So as weird as it is that Action Comics, of all things, is going to be a planet-focused book, that's kind of been the promise that he's mentioned in interviews in terms of how it's going to distinguish itself from Superman. So while it may not be called Daily Planet, I think we're going to get something approximating that in concept.
And I'm perfectly good with that. I like that idea. But Joe, your thoughts on Brian Michael Bendis taking over both Superman and Action Comics? Excited, not excited? Where are you falling on Bendis?
Well, I'm excited by the fact that it's Bendis. So, I mean, he's one of my favorite writers, so I'm really excited about that. But the last time I sort of felt this way about a Marvel writer coming over to DC to write Superman was JMS. And as excited I was, it didn't turn out to be, well, good.
Yeah.
It was some okay stuff, some bad stuff, but I'm not sure I quite get that feeling with this time. I think it's actually going to be quite better. But there is some, trepidation I do have with him writing Superman, because I usually would expect him to write Batman. I think he could be a really great Green Arrow writer, I actually think, as well.
Yeah, I'm kind of there with you. When I think of Bendis, I do like him writing like a team book, so I could actually see him doing something like with maybe Teen Titans. I think that he would be a really interesting voice on that book that might actually help to return it to prominence, because it's floundered for quite some time now, and it's had moments of being just okay, or being, I guess somewhat decent, but for the most part it's been kind of down in the dumps. I'd also I think that Bendis writing a Nightwing book might be interesting. I think that his sensibilities...
Yeah, I think so too.
I think
of course you guys do.
Well,
he could write the Flash as well.
Yes, a Bendis on the Flash would be really interesting. He could really spread out into those some of his wackier ideas that would probably fit really well with either Barry Allen or Wally West. So there's,
and get David Finch as his artist,
please. David Finch on a regular Flash book would be outstanding. His variant covers lately have been just incredible. Now, Greg, feelings on Bendis taking over both Superman books, both monthlies?
Well, I guess I should come into this by saying I'm probably the lowest on Bendis of all the people on the panel. Not that I don't like Bendis, because I like some of his stuff very, very much. In fact, I think what I've read of his Daredevil has been great. What I've read of his Ultimate Spider-Man has been good. But I also have read things by Bendis that bug me, that don't really click with me. And I think his wordiness at times grates on me a little bit, and his sometimes he's very reticent to delve into the action, sometimes as much as I think might be needed for big event books. However, generally very good focusing on individual characters and going into their worlds and how their minds operate and things like that. So I think he's going to be baseline good. But I have to say, him taking over both books is kind of a bummer to me, because one of the things I've really loved about Rebirth is how both of the titles were good, Superman and Action, but if you were feeling one more than the other, they were doing different things. Tomasi and Gleason were kind of embracing this almost tribute to Superman's past at times, so with tributes to the Silver Age, the Bronze Age, the Modern Age, and everything like that. And Jurgens was going off and doing his own thing, kind of in a world that felt very familiar to what I like in Superman. And so while I enjoyed both runs, I found myself gravitating to the Jurgens run more so, and so I was able to dig that. And you've got three really distinct voices on Superman over the course of the last few years. And so I think dropping down to one guy shepherding both books is a little bit of a bummer, just from the standpoint of getting that variety. However, the one thing that gives me hope for this is I've read all of Bendis' interviews going into this, and I love, to what Nick mentioned earlier, his approach to doing something different with Action than what he's going to do in Superman, making Action more of perhaps the Lois and John book a little bit more, focusing on the Daily Planet and the ancillary supporting characters, which is not too different from what we had in the triangle number era of the early 90s, where each book kind of focused on a different set of characters, with Superman as the lead, of course. So I think I am cautiously optimistic about how the books are going to be quality-wise, but at the same time, it's hard for me to get over the slight feeling of disappointment that the Jurgens run is coming to an end, and that we're losing a little bit of that variety. But still, I do have confidence that at the very least it's going to be good, and it has the potential to be much better than good.
I'm kind of with you there. Pretty much with you, overall on Bendis taking over both Superman books. I will miss the two books having such a distinct difference in voice and in overall goals. But there is some benefit to having a singular voice shepherding Superman through both of his books. Not unlike how John Byrne was doing it back in the day.
Mm-hmm. That's true. That's a great comparison. And the one thing you're not going to run into is the problem they had in the New 52, where Superman was different based on who was writing him.
Yes.
Like completely different characters at times.
Wildly different between Superman and Action Comics. It was,
and even Justice League, and even guest shots and Supergirl or whatever. It felt like everybody that was writing him was pretty much just doing whatever they wanted to do with him, without regard for the greater narrative.
Exactly. It was a time in DC Comics where nobody could agree on what Superman actually was, who this character was at his core, and everybody's different ideas did not mesh together. But with the Rebirth era, it really feels like they've gotten Superman back on track. Superman is really in a good place right now, and with Brian Michael Bendis coming in to put his stamp on the character, I'm pretty confident in this, actually. I think that it's going to wind up being, I don't want to say that it could be the greatest Superman run of all time. No, I think we may have already had that. And I'm going to put Dan Jurgens at the head of the class. But this could be good. It could be really good. And with Ivan Rice drawing, I believe he's drawing the main Superman book, and with Patrick Gleason is staying on Superman. He's going to be drawing Action Comics. So we're going to have, a little bit of a familiar voice in there, because Patrick Gleason tends to, get some narrative input as well, as he's as capable a writer as he is an artist. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing what the creative teams are going to be doing moving forward. And I'm happy to say that at 80 years old, Superman is looking better than most of us are going to at that age. So it's a good time to be a Superman fan. It's a good time to try out Superman, actually. I would actually think that if you've never read Superman before in your life, and you've always wondered, what is this character about? Or maybe you've been one of those, like Nick used to be, like super skeptical of the character, and that's putting it mildly. I would put Action Comics 1000 in your hands and say, this is as good an intro to the character as I think I could give you.
Absolutely. And in particular, of all of the stories in Action 1000, I think the one that probably does the best job of what you're talking about, just encapsulating who Superman is and why he means so much to so many people, is actually The Car.
Yes,
by Johns and Donner and Coyple. I think if I had one little snippet from this book to give to someone who's not a Superman fan that says, I don't get it, to say, this is at its core, this is who Superman is at his core, I would give them that story.
Yeah, I think that you can hand them this whole book and say, there is something in here that's going to resonate with you, that's going to get it across to you why Superman is so important and why we love this character so much. So in that regard, I would say that Action Comics 1000 is everything it needed to be and more. So hats off to DC Comics for putting out one of the best Superman books for my money that you could pick up. Right on up there with For the Man Who Has Everything for me. And I realize it's an anthology title. It's not exactly the same thing, but man, there's some good stuff in there. So go get that. Go get that book right now, digital, or go visit your local comic shop. Pick it up there. You won't be disappointed. I do think that digital version, Greg, that you've got has got an extra story in it that's not in here.
That makes sense. That was probably the one that I was talking about, the game, right?
Yeah, yes, the game is not in the print version of this book. So that was a digital...
Triple H in that?
Yeah, he actually pedigrees Superman and pins him right off the bat. Very strange story.
Pedigrees him on some kryptonite.
Yeah,
it's especially weird because since most of the stories are only like 8 pages, Triple H's entrance actually takes up 12, which is interesting.
Yes, and then he actually pedigrees Superman right off the bat, and then lays there waiting for Superman to sell for another 15 pages before pinning him.
Mm-hmm. And here you thought this whole podcast was going to go by without one wrestling reference? You were wrong. You've been proven wrong again.
And we didn't even start it. Joe started it.
Joe
served it up for us on a platter.
We were on our best behavior tonight for the most part.
Hey, wrestling references.
Triple H also do a DX chop to Superman?
Oh, of course.
Like chopping it right over his face. You know what? I'll allow it.
Superman.
Joe had to make a grand entrance here, and he has done so. So, with that, before we get out of here, we got one last little bit of business because if all goes to plan, this will be out by the weekend. I'm hoping by Friday, with the opening of Avengers Infinity War. That's right, we're going to shift gears completely and go right into a little bit of Marvel, a little MCU for you guys, since it is the opening week for what may arguably be the biggest MCU movie ever. So we're going to go right around the table to everybody and get your anticipation level for Infinity War and give me a prediction of death. Which character do you think is most likely to bite the big one in Infinity War of the main Avengers cast? So, Greg, I'm going to start with you. Anticipation level and death prediction.
Anticipation level is the highest it's been for any superhero movie except 2012 and The Dark Knight Rises.
Yep.
Could not be any more excited for this movie. Been wanting to see it since I was 7 years old. And as far as the death prediction, I have several, but if I'm just picking one from the main cast, because I think it's possible we could see multiple from the main cast, but if I'm just picking one, Cap is my pick. Captain America.
Yep, that is I think a very strong possibility. Joe, anticipation level and your prediction of death.
Anticipation level is as high as any movie I can recall, superhero or otherwise. This just looks towering in what they're doing here. As for who I think is going to bite it, I'm going to say Hawkeye.
That's kind of the dark horse pick there, but given that we haven't really seen Hawkeye in much or any of the promotional materials, I think that's a strong possibility. I think that that maybe Hawkeye has seen his, maybe drawn his last arrow. Now, I'm going to save mine for last. Nick, anticipation level and death prediction.
Anticipation level as high as any movie ever not called The Dark Knight Rises, Star Wars The Force Awakens, or Star Wars The Last Jedi. And death prediction, the entire main cast except for Doctor Strange.
Hot damn. Including like Spider-Man and Black Panther?
Yes, in a manner of speaking.
Okay. Well, we will leave it there. We will wait and see. As far as my own, yes, I'm right there with you guys. I think this is going to be the superhero epic of our time. I think it's the one we've been waiting 10 years for this big moment. They've built such an immersive universe on film in a way that my teenage self can't believe we're actually getting. And at a time in my life whenever I feel like I can fully appreciate this whole thing for what it truly is and what it really means. Mm-hmm. And as far as my death prediction, I'm going to go with my favorite Avenger, mostly because I think his contract is up, and he's been looking for a graceful exit, and it would also play off of a dream sequence from Avengers Age of Ultron. I think this is the end of the road for Tony Stark. I think Iron Man will go out on a big hero note, and all those people who are just completely wrong in siding with him are completely wrong with siding with Cap from Civil War, will suddenly realize the error of their ways that Iron Man, in fact, was the true hero of this entire universe. So I'm expecting big things. I think this is going to be, of course, it's going to be a massive hit. Big box office numbers are going to just roll in for this one. I think it could easily hit that worldwide cume of 500 million in its opening weekend. This is going to be a big one. So if you haven't got,
it's going to be cumin like fire.
It will be cumin fire, and you guys need to go out and get your tickets right now if you haven't already. Shows are selling out. It's going to be big. So guys, I want to say thank you again to my guests, the Hard-Traveling Fanboys, and Joe Johnson for joining me on this one to talk all about our current events from April. It's been a hell of a time, guys. Thank you again for being here, and I'm going to give you a couple seconds here to plug your upcoming shows, and of course, a certain something that we were all kind of involved with not too long ago. So. Hard-Traveling Fanboys, take it away. What you guys got coming up? What can people expect out of you guys in the coming weeks?
Well, right now, actually, at the time people are listening to this, you will hear our latest episode, which is our latest entry in Hard Travelers for Hire, which is our monthly look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe, movie by movie, and we have finally arrived to Doctor Strange. So we're cutting a Ricochet-like pace this thing right now. And we are looking forward to people hearing that. That was a pretty fun show. A little bit of a debate between us in that one. And going forward, people can expect a Long Book Hunters episode, speaking of Superman, on John Byrne's Man of Steel. A book that Nick has never read and a book that I haven't read in years, but that is fundamentally important to my fandom based on what it led to. So we're going to be delving into the John Byrne era. We have a few other shows of that nature planned, and right now people can go on and check out Place to Be Nation Comic Book Theater Watchmen Part 2, which features appearances by a litany of Place to Be Nation personalities, including you, Russell, yes, who have a starring role in it, myself, Nick, Jennifer Smith, Miranda's in it, David Sunday of the Sunday Groove is in it, Tim Capel, Todd Weber, all of our comic book crew is in it. Lots of Place to Be Nation luminaries make appearances. Some of our outside friends, such as a what I think is a star-making debut for Andrew Garner in this one. And it's a riot, folks. A laugh riot for the whole family to enjoy.
Well,
and last thing I'm going to plug, in a few months here, we are going to be hitting award season here at Place to Be Nation Pop, and it'll be time for the most prestigious event of the year, the 2018 Halfies.
And by a few months, Greg, means a few weeks.
Months, weeks.
Who gives a shit?
The rest.
Yes. All of that is great. And, of course, you guys can be found on Twitter as well, yes?
Yes. I am G. Phillips 8652. He is Nick Duke 87. And also, join the Place to Be Nation Comics Facebook page. Mm-hmm. Lots of fun discussions like we've had right here on this broadcast.
Yes.
Yeah, and in addition to those things, I know Greg recently did a guest spot over on the wrestling feed for Survey Says. That episode is up or isn't up, Greg?
It is not up yet, but
it should be soon.
Should be in the near future.
Probably will be by the time this hits.
We have no control over anything that goes on over there, so we can't say that with any certainty. And then back on the pop side, I have done quality control. 2.5 stores. I have recently done guest appearances on both Geek and Sassy and Talkin' Pop for their most recent episodes. So if you like discussions of implied interracial anal sex or drunken escapades in New Orleans, you can hear me on those 2 shows. And then at some point in the next couple of months, there's also a new comic book podcast coming to Place to Be Nation Pop. Don't know when we're going to record that, but there is a Marvel history specific show coming, I'd say in the next 8 to 12 weeks, hopefully, that I'll be a part of.
To which I will also be joining in on.
Right.
So that will be a fun project. Looking forward to finally getting started on that one. Of course, you can find me on Twitter at Russell_Sellers, and I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts on Action Comics 1000, on Doomsday Clock. Of course, like Greg mentioned, join the Facebook page, the Facebook group, if you will, Place to Be Nation Comics. Lots of fun discussion there. But Joe, it's time to plug you a little bit. Where can the people find you on Twitter?
They can go to at DallasJose91 on Twitter. So if you want to tweet me and talk about comics, I'm always happy to. Or if you just want to tell me how much I suck, that's.
No, the people are going to love some Joe. They're going to get their daily dose of Joe. He's a fun guy on Twitter. He's always fun to talk comics with. Also a member of our Place to Be Nation Comics group. Joe, it's been fun having you on. This has been a great debut for you. Hopefully we'll be having you back on in the very near future.
This has been one enjoyable cup of Joe.
And
well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Not a problem, man. We're happy that you joined us. And with that, thank you guys for listening to another edition of the Sellers Points podcast. We will be back next month when I will be joined by another couple of special guests, and we're going to be talking something that we very rarely get into on this podcast, and that's talking a little bit of Image Comics. We're going to be taking a look at some current favorites, some past favorites as well. Might even get into a little bit of indie comics discussion, so you guys definitely want to be here for that one. And in the coming months, who knows? We'll see what develops for the podcast as we continue this wonderful journey into comics. So with that, thank you guys very much for joining us. We will see you next time.